The train station was louder than it had any right to be at dawn. Wheels screamed against steel, loudspeakers crackled with half-heard announcements, and strangers brushed past one another as if none of them truly existed. Yet in the middle of all that noise, Adrian Vale felt an unexpected stillness settle inside him, the kind that arrived only when something was about to change and you didn't yet know how to stop it. He hadn't planned to stop. Billionaires rarely did. His driver had already slowed the car only because the traffic near the station was impossible, and Adrian, staring absently through the tinted window, was thinking about numbers, deadlines, and a merger that would be announced by nightfall. This city was just another on his itinerary, another place where his name would be printed in bold headlines and forgotten just as quickly. Then he saw her. She stood near the edge of the platform, too small for the oversized gray sweater that hung off her shoulders, her dark hair tied with a fraying ribbon. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. In her hands was a cardboard sign, bent and smudged, its words written in uneven letters. Adrian didn't read it at first. What caught him was the way she looked at people, not begging, not pleading, but searching, as if she were waiting for one specific face to appear out of the crowd. Something tightened in his chest. He told himself it was nothing. He had seen poverty before. He had funded shelters, signed checks with more zeros than most people could imagine, and attended galas where suffering was discussed over champagne. This was not new. And yet, his hand lifted before he realized it, tapping once on the glass. "Stop the car," he said. The driver glanced at him in the rear-view mirror, surprised. "Sir, I said stop." The car came to a halt near the curb. The driver began to protest this wasn't safe. They were already late, but Adrian was already opening the door. The cold morning air hit his face, sharp and real, and for the first time that day he felt awake. As he stepped toward the platform, people stared. Some recognized him instantly. Others only saw a tall man in a tailored coat who didn't belong there. The girl noticed him too. Her eyes widened, not in awe, but in cautious curiosity. She tightened her grip on the sign. Up close, Adrian could read it. "I'm not lost. I'm waiting." Waiting for what? Or for whom? He knelt slightly so he wouldn't tower over her. "Good morning," he said gently, surprising himself with how careful his voice sounded. She studied his face the way adults usually did to her measuring, deciding whether he was safe. Finally, she spoke. "You're not supposed to stop." The words caught him off guard. "Why not?" "Because people like you don't," she said simply. A murmur passed through the crowd behind them, commuters pretending not to listen while missing nothing. Adrian felt heat rise to his neck, not from embarrassment, but from a strange sense of being seen. "What makes you think you know what kind of person I am?" She pointed at his coat, his watch, the polished shoes that had never known dust like this. "You look like someone who's always moving. People who move fast don't stop for small things." He almost smiled. Almost. And what if this small thing matters? Her gaze flicked to the tracks, where a train roared past, wind whipping her hair. When it was gone, she looked back at him. "Then you'll listen." Something in the way she said it, quiet, certain, made him nod. "What are you waiting for?" he asked. She hesitated, then lowered her sign. "Someone who promised." The word promise echoed louder in his mind than the trains. Adrian had built his empire breaking promises made by weaker men, rewriting contracts, bending outcomes. Promises were currency, and he had learned early that they were rarely honored without force. "Who promised you?" he asked. "My mother," she said. "She said if I stayed right here, no matter what, someone would come who could help." Adrian straightened slowly. "Help with what?" The girl swallowed. Her fingers trembled just enough for him to notice. "She said I wouldn't have to be afraid anymore." A lump formed in his throat, unexpected and unwelcome. He had children of his own grown now, educated in the best schools, protected from the world by walls of money. None of them had ever stood alone in a train station waiting for hope to show up. "Where is your mother now?" he asked. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said, "She told me not to tell that part until the right person came." "And how will you know who that is?" She looked at him again, really looked, her eyes dark and steady. "Because they'll stop." Behind them, Adrian's phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from executives, reminders from his assistant, the world demanding he return to it. He ignored them all. "Do you want something to eat?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because if I leave, I might miss them." The logic was painfully pure. Adrian glanced around. Security was already approaching, uncertain whether to intervene. He waved them off with a small gesture. For once, his authority didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like responsibility. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena." "Lena," he repeated, tasting the name. "I'm Adrian." "I know," she said. That surprised him enough that he laughed softly. "You do." "You're on the screens sometimes," she replied. "My mom used to say you were a man who could change things." The irony was sharp enough to hurt. "Did she?" "Yes," Lena said. "But she also said men like you forget the little people." A train announcement boomed overhead, announcing departures and arrivals, time moving on whether anyone was ready or not. Adrian felt as if he were standing at the edge of something vast and unseen. "Lena," he said slowly, "what if the person your mother promised hasn't come yet?" She looked down at her sign, then back up at him. "Then I'll keep waiting." The certainty in her voice made his chest ache. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, then stopped. This wasn't about money. He knew that instinctively. Before he could say anything else, Lena leaned closer and lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret meant only for him. She said when he comes, I should tell him one thing first. Adrian leaned in too. "What is it?" Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "She said I should tell you that this station is where everything you lost began." The words hit him like a blow. Images flashed uninvited: an old train station, years ago, a goodbye he had never forgiven himself for, a choice that had made him rich and hollow all at once. His breath caught. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely steady. But before Lena could answer, a shout rose from the far end of the platform. A man was pushing through the crowd, calling her name with rising panic. Lena stiffened. She grabbed her sign again, her small body suddenly tense. "That's not who I'm waiting for," she whispered. And in that moment, Adrian realized this wasn't a coincidence, and whatever was unfolding at this station was tied to him in ways he didn't yet understand. If this story already has you hooked, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional stories like this. The man was getting closer now, his voice louder, desperate. Adrian took a step forward without thinking, positioning himself slightly in front of Lena, his heart pounding not from fear, but from the terrifying sense that stopping his car that morning had set something irreversible in motion. The man's footsteps echoed sharply against the concrete, each step carrying urgency and something darker: panic edged with anger. Adrian felt it before he fully understood it, the instinct that had kept him alive in boardrooms and backroom negotiations alike. He shifted again, subtly but deliberately, placing himself fully between Lena and the approaching stranger. "Lena," the man called again. He was in his 30s, maybe older, with a jacket too thin for the cold and eyes that darted around as if searching not just for the girl but for witnesses. When he finally reached them, he slowed, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Lena didn't move. Her small fingers clenched the cardboard sign so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. "You said you'd come yesterday," she said, her voice steady but thin. "You didn't." The man laughed awkwardly, glancing at Adrian. Kids, you know how they exaggerate. He extended a hand toward her. Come on. We're late. Adrian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Who are you? He asked. The man's smile stiffened. That's none of your business. It became my business the moment you started shouting at a child, Adrian replied calmly. For a second, the man looked as if he might push past him anyway. Then recognition flickered. His gaze dropped to Adrian's watch, then his face. The color drained slightly. Look, sir, she's my niece. She wanders off sometimes. We appreciate your concern. Lena shook her head. You're lying. The word cut through the noise like a blade. People nearby slowed, pretending to check their phones while listening intently. The man's jaw tightened. Lena, stop it. She told me not to go with you, Lena said, her voice trembling now despite her effort to keep it firm. She said if you came, I should wait for him. Adrian felt something shift inside him at the word him. The man's eyes narrowed. Who told you that? My mother. A silence fell, heavy and charged. The man's hand dropped. His expression changed, irritation giving way to something sharper. Your mother doesn't know what she's talking about. Adrian leaned closer to him, his tone still even but edged with steel. If she's not your niece, and if she doesn't want to go with you, then you should leave. And who are you to decide that? The man snapped, his voice rising. You think because you've got money, you can just— Yes, Adrian said quietly. I do. The simplicity of the answer stunned the man more than any threat could have. Before he could respond, a uniformed security officer approached, alerted by the raised voices. Is there a problem here? The officer asked. The man stepped back instantly, hands raised in a show of innocence. No problem. Just a misunderstanding. Lena moved closer to Adrian, her shoulder brushing his coat. The contact was light, almost accidental, but it anchored him. I don't want to go with him, she said clearly. The officer looked from her to the man. Sir, can you provide identification or proof of guardianship? The man hesitated just a second too long. I left my wallet. That's what you always say, Lena whispered. The officer straightened. I'm going to need you to step aside. As the man was led away, still protesting, his eyes locked onto Lena's with a look that made Adrian's stomach knot. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. Whatever his role in her life had been, it wasn't finished. When he was gone, the noise of the station rushed back in, as if nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Adrian exhaled slowly, only then realizing he'd been holding his breath. Lena looked up at him. You stayed, she said. I did. She studied his face again, as if comparing it to a memory only she could see. You look different up close. Is that good or bad? She considered it. Different isn't bad. Different means things can change. The officer returned. Sir, we'll need to involve child services. Is she with you? Adrian hesitated. The correct answer was no. The honest answer was also no. But something inside him resisted letting the machinery of the system swallow her without understanding the full story. I'm with him, Lena said before he could respond. Both men looked at her. You're sure? The officer asked gently. She nodded. He stopped. The officer studied Adrian, clearly recognizing him now. After a moment, he gave a small nod. All right. We'll take statements later. Please stay nearby. As the officer walked away, Adrian crouched again so he was eye level with her. Lena, do you understand what you just did? She nodded again, more slowly. My mom said I'd have to be brave. A strange tightness filled his chest. Tell me about your mother." Lena's gaze drifted toward the tracks. "She used to bring me here when I was little. She said trains were for people going somewhere new. She liked to watch them leave." "Where is she now?" Adrian asked softly. Lena's lips pressed together. When she spoke, her voice was barely above the hum of the station. "She got sick. But before she did, she told me everything." "Everything about what?" "About you." The word landed like a thunderclap. Adrian felt his heart stutter. "About me?" "Yes," Lena said. "She said there was a time you stood right where we are now. She said you were scared, and someone you loved asked you to stay." Adrian's mind reeled. Memories surged too fast, too vivid. A younger version of himself, standing on a platform just like this one, suitcase in hand. A woman crying. A choice made in the name of ambition. "That's not possible," he whispered. "She said you chose the train," Lena continued. "She said that choice made you powerful, but it also broke something you never fixed." The world seemed to tilt. Adrian stood slowly, the station spinning around him. "What was her name?" he asked. Lena finally looked at him again. "You already know." Before he could respond, Adrian's phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again. And again. The screen lit up with his assistant's name, followed by a message preview that made his blood run cold. "Emergency. Legal team needs you now. It's about the past." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them to find Lena watching him, as if she could see the battle raging inside him. "My mom said you'd get a call," she said quietly. "She said that's when you'd have to decide again." "Decide what?" Adrian asked. "Whether to run," Lena said, "or finally stay." The distant whistle of an approaching train cut through the air, long and mournful. Adrian looked toward the tracks, then back at the girl whose life had somehow collided with his own. And for the first time in decades, the future he had so carefully controlled felt utterly uncertain. The train roared past them in a rush of wind and noise, blurring faces and colors into a single streak of motion. Adrian watched it go, his reflection flickering briefly in the windows before vanishing. When the sound finally faded, he realized Lena was still speaking, her voice steady against the chaos. "She said you'd look at the train like it could save you," Lena said. "But it won't. Not this time." Adrian swallowed. "Your mother shouldn't have put that kind of weight on you." "She didn't," Lena replied. "She said I was stronger than I looked." He glanced down at her again, at the dirt under her fingernails and the resolve in her eyes. "How did you end up here alone?" Lena hesitated. "I wasn't supposed to be alone. But plans change." A familiar bitterness crept into Adrian's thoughts. Plans always changed. People paid the price. "Where were you staying?" he asked. "With her friend," Lena said. "But then she got scared." "Of what?" "Of the man who came before," Lena answered, and Adrian felt a chill. "She said he asked too many questions." Adrian's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen this time. Another message from his legal counsel, brief but alarming. Old case reopened. Media already sniffing around. He locked the screen without replying. "Lena," he said carefully, "has anyone told you to come here today? Anyone besides your mother?" She nodded once. "A letter came." "When?" 3 days ago." "Who gave it to you?" "It was under the door. It said to come to the station early and wait. It said if I didn't, something bad would happen." Adrian felt anger spark, sharp and protective. "Did it say who sent it?" "No name," Lena said. "But it said you would understand." A thread began to form in his mind, weaving past and present into something disturbingly coherent. The man from before. The reopened case. The letter. This wasn't chance. It was orchestration. "We can't stay here," Adrian said finally. Lena's shoulders tensed. "You're leaving?" "No," he said quickly. "We're moving somewhere safer." She studied his face, searching for doubt. "You promise?" The word promise echoed again. Adrian hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." As they walked away from the platform, whispers followed them. Phones were raised. Someone called Adrian's name. He ignored it all, guiding Lena through the crowd toward the waiting car. The driver stepped out immediately, eyes wide. "Sir, what's going on?" "Change of plans," Adrian said. "We're going to the townhouse." The driver glanced at Lena. "Right away." As they pulled into traffic, Lena pressed her forehead against the window, watching the station recede. "She said you lived in a big house with empty rooms," she murmured. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. "Too accurate." "Did she say why?" "She said empty rooms remember things," Lena replied. "Even when people don't want them to." The ride was quiet after that, the city sliding by in a gray blur. Adrian's phone remained silent now, but the weight of what awaited him pressed heavily on his chest. When they arrived, the townhouse loomed tall and pristine, its windows dark. Lena stared up at it. "It's bigger than I imagined." "It's just walls," Adrian said, though the words rang hollow. Inside, the house smelled faintly of polish and nothing else. No laughter. No warmth. Lena's footsteps echoed as she stepped inside, her eyes taking in the sweeping staircase and high ceilings. "It sounds lonely," she said. Adrian removed his coat slowly. "It is." A housekeeper appeared, startled. "Mr. Vale, we weren't expecting." "Please bring some food," Adrian said gently. "And a blanket." The woman nodded, glancing at Lena with curiosity and concern before disappearing. Lena wandered toward a large framed photograph on the wall. A younger Adrian stood beside a woman, both smiling, arms linked. Lena tilted her head. "That's her." Adrian froze. He walked over slowly, his heart pounding. "You've never seen her before," he said. "But I know her," Lena replied. "She used to sing when she cooked." "She burned everything." His breath caught. "What was her name?" Lena looked up at him, her expression solemn. "You still haven't said it." Adrian's voice was barely a whisper. "Claire." Lena nodded. "That's my mother." The room seemed to shrink around them. Adrian sank into a nearby chair, the weight of the past crashing down with unforgiving force. "She never told me," he said hoarsely. "I never knew." "She said you weren't ready," Lena replied. "She said if she told you back then, you would have chosen the train again." Tears blurred his vision, something that hadn't happened in years. "And now?" "Now she said you might choose differently," Lena said. The housekeeper returned with a tray. She paused when she sensed the gravity of the moment, then quietly set the food down. Lena sat at the table but didn't eat. She looked at Adrian instead. "The letter said if you helped me, the truth would come out." "About everything." "What truth?" Adrian asked. "The one people buried," Lena said. "The one that makes powerful men afraid." Adrian's phone vibrated again, this time with an incoming call from an unknown number. He stared at it for a long moment, then answered. "Adrian Vale," he said. A distorted voice replied, low and deliberate. "You should have stayed on the train." Adrian's grip tightened. "Who is this?" "You've already involved the girl," the voice continued. "That was a mistake." Adrian glanced at Lena, who watched him calmly, as if she had expected this. "If you think you can threaten me—" The line went dead. Silence filled the room once more, thick and foreboding. Adrian lowered the phone slowly, his mind racing. Lena finally picked up her spoon. She said they would call, she said. She said they're scared because you remember now. Adrian looked at his daughter, and felt a surge of resolve burn through the fear. Then they should be, he said softly, as sirens wailed faintly somewhere in the distance, growing closer. The sirens faded before reaching the townhouse, dissolving into the distant hum of the city. Adrian remained still for several seconds after the call ended, as if any sudden movement might fracture the fragile calm that had settled over the room. Lena watched him closely, her spoon hovering above the untouched food. Margaret stepped forward, urgency sharpening her voice. They won't stop at intimidation. They're desperate. Why now? Adrian demanded. Because the letters are already in motion, Margaret said. Some have been opened. Some haven't. And one of them contains evidence that can't be buried again. Adrian's mind raced. Where is it? Margaret looked at Lena. She has it. Every eye turned to the girl. Lena reached into her sweater again, slower this time, and pulled out a small, worn flash drive taped carefully inside a piece of cardboard. My mom said if anything happened, Lena said, I should keep it close. She said this is the truth that scares them. Adrian stared at the tiny object, stunned. You carried this all this time? Lena nodded. I was afraid I'd lose it if I put it down. The sound of shouting rose outside now, louder, closer. Adrian's security chief spoke urgently into his radio, issuing commands. Adrian crouched in front of Lena, his voice steady despite the chaos. Listen to me. No matter what happens next, you stay with Margaret. Do you understand? Lena looked at him, her eyes searching his face. You're not leaving again, she said. He swallowed hard. No. Another crash rattled the windows. Margaret reached for Lena's hand. Come with me, she urged. There's a place they won't expect. As they moved toward the back of the house, Adrian followed, his mind locked on one thought above all others. The past he had outrun for decades had finally caught up, and this time it wasn't asking for permission. Behind them, the front door shook under the force of someone trying to break through, and Adrian knew with chilling certainty that whatever came next would demand more than money, more than power. It would demand the truth. The hallway narrowed as they moved deeper into the house, the noise from the front fading into a dull thrum that made Adrian's heartbeat sound impossibly loud. Margaret led them with certainty, her steps quick but controlled, as if she had walked this path many times in her mind if not in reality. There's a service passage behind the old study, she said over her shoulder. It was built before the renovations. Most people don't even know it exists. Another bang echoed through the house, closer now, followed by a shout. Adrian glanced back instinctively, every protective instinct screaming at him to turn around and face whatever was coming. Instead, he tightened his grip on Lena's hand. You okay? He asked quietly. Lena nodded, though her fingers were cold. I'm not scared, she said. Just ready. The word unsettled him more than fear would have. No child should sound ready for something like this. They reached a heavy wooden door partially concealed behind a tall bookshelf. Margaret pushed it aside with surprising strength, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Down, she said. Quickly. As they stepped inside, Adrian heard glass shatter from the direction of the foyer. Shouts grew clearer now, angry, urgent. The door closed behind them, plunging the passage into near darkness until Margaret flicked on a small light. The air smelled old, unused. The walls were lined with pipes and faded markings, remnants of a life the house had once lived before it became a monument to success. Who are these people? Lena asked as they descended. Margaret didn't answer immediately. Men who built their fortunes the same way your father did, she said finally. By deciding which truths mattered. Adrian winced but didn't argue. And Claire knew all of this? Yes, Margaret replied. She knew more than anyone. That's why they watched her. That's why they were afraid when she started writing. They reached the bottom of the stairs and entered a small, windowless room. Margaret locked the door behind them and leaned against it, breathing heavily. "This will buy us time," she said. "Not much, but enough." Adrian scanned the room. Old filing cabinets lined one wall, dust thick on their handles. A single table sat in the center, scarred and worn. "Time for what?" "For you to decide," Margaret said, meeting his gaze. Again. Lena climbed onto one of the chairs and set the flash drive carefully on the table between them. "She said you'd have to choose what kind of man you wanted to be when it was hardest." Adrian stared at the small device, the weight of it far greater than its size. "What's on it?" he asked. Margaret answered this time. "Documents. Recordings. Names. Proof that the accident wasn't an accident. Proof that the settlement was coerced. Proof that people died because speaking was made too expensive." Adrian's jaw tightened. He remembered the night of the factory collapse, the frantic calls, the legal briefings that followed before the bodies were even recovered. He had told himself it was survival. "And if this comes out?" he asked. Margaret's voice was steady. "You won't just lose money. You'll lose protection." Lena looked up at him. "But other people might get something back," she said. "Like answers." A distant thud reverberated through the floor above them, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots. Adrian's security team was still holding them off, but not for long. Adrian reached out and took the flash drive. For a moment, he felt like the young man on the train platform again, suitcase in hand, future glittering just out of reach. "They won't stop," he said quietly, "even if I give them this." "No," Margaret agreed. "But they'll lose control of the story." Lena's eyes were fixed on his face. She said stories are how people survive the truth. A voice shouted from somewhere above, muffled but furious. Another crash followed. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Adrian straightened, decision crystallizing inside him with terrifying clarity. "Then we don't hide it," he said. "We release it." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "Publicly?" "Yes," Adrian replied. "All of it. At once." Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "She hoped you'd say that." Adrian managed a faint smile. "She always did see further than I did." He pulled out his phone, fingers moving quickly as he sent a series of messages, short, direct, irreversible. Legal teams, journalists he trusted more than others, a public statement drafted in brutal honesty. Margaret watched him, something like relief softening her features. "Once this is out," she said, "there's no going back." "I know," Adrian replied. "That's the point." A sudden, sharp bang shook the door behind them, metal groaning under impact. Someone was trying to force it open. Lena slid off the chair and stood beside Adrian, her small hand slipping into his again. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I'm glad you stopped." The door shuddered again, the lock protesting loudly. Adrian tightened his grip on her hand, his heart pounding not with fear now, but with something dangerously close to hope. Above them, the house echoed with chaos, and Adrian knew that when the door finally gave way, nothing would ever be contained again. The lock screamed as metal warped under repeated blows, each impact sending a vibration through the floor that traveled straight into Adrian's bones. He positioned himself instinctively in front of Lena, shielding her with his body, though he knew how thin that protection truly was. "Margaret," he said low, "is there another way out?" Margaret shook her head, eyes fixed on the door. "Not from here. This room was meant to hide things, not people." Another hit the door, harder this time. A crack spidered through the old wood. Lena looked up at Adrian, her face pale but steady. "If they get in," she said quietly, "they'll want the drive." "Yes," Adrian replied. "And they'll want silence even more." Margaret moved to one of the filing cabinets and yanked it open. Inside were yellowed folders, brittle with age. She pulled several out and spread them across the table. "These are copies," she said quickly. "Not as complete as what your mother kept, but enough to slow them down." Adrian glanced at the papers, recognizing signatures, dates, seals that should never have existed together. "You kept all this?" "I promised Claire," Margaret said simply. A heavy crack split the doorframe. Wood splintered inward. Adrian's phone buzzed again. He looked down 3 missed calls, dozens of messages flooding in. Headlines were already forming. Screenshots. Leaks. His name everywhere. "It started," he said. Margaret let out a breath that was half relief, half dread. "Then they're already too late." The door burst inward with a deafening crack. One hinge tore free, leaving the door hanging at an angle. Shouts filled the hallway beyond. "Adrian Vale," a voice called. "This doesn't have to end badly." Adrian felt Lena's hand tighten in his. He leaned down slightly, his voice urgent but calm. "Whatever happens next, you stay behind me. Don't move unless I tell you to." She nodded once. The door gave way completely, slamming against the wall. 2 men stepped inside, dressed in dark coats, their faces hard and familiar in the way powerful men often were men who had never been told no. One of them smiled thinly. "You always did like drama." Adrian recognized him instantly. "Harlan." "Still sharp," Harlan said. His eyes flicked to Lena, then to Margaret. "You've complicated things." "You did that years ago," Adrian replied. "I'm just done cleaning it up." Harlan's smile faded. "Hand over the drive." "No," Adrian said. "You don't understand," Harlan snapped. "If this goes all the way public, it won't just ruin us. It will tear apart things you don't even see." Adrian stepped forward. "Good." Harlan's jaw tightened. "You think this girl is your redemption? She's leverage. That's all she'll ever be to people like us." Adrian felt something inside him harden. "Not anymore." Harlan took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You can still stop this. Make a statement. Call it misinformation. People will believe you. They always do." Behind Adrian, Lena spoke. "You're afraid." Harlan turned toward her sharply. "You should be quiet." "No," she said, her voice small but unwavering. "My mom said when men like you get loud, it means they're losing." For a fraction of a second, Harlan looked genuinely startled. Then anger flashed across his face. "Enough." Before he could move, Adrian's security team burst into the room from the opposite corridor, weapons raised. The space filled instantly with tension, every breath held. "Stand down," Adrian commanded. His security chief hesitated but obeyed. Adrian met Harlan's gaze. "It's over. The files are already out. You can't put this back." Harlan laughed, sharp and humorless. "You think this ends because you confessed? This just changes the battlefield." He gestured subtly to one of the men behind him. "Leave." As quickly as they had entered, Harlan and his associates backed out, disappearing into the chaos above. The threat lingered in the air long after they were gone. Margaret sank into a chair, trembling. "They'll regroup." "I know," Adrian said. Lena looked up at him. "But now people are listening." Adrian nodded. His phone rang again, this time a number he knew well. He answered. "Adrian," his assistant said, voice strained. "You need to see this." "I'm already in it," Adrian replied. "No," she said. You need to see who just went live. Adrian's stomach dropped. Who? She swallowed audibly. The man from the station. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, dread settling in his chest. What is he saying? That you kidnapped the girl, she said. And that you're trying to erase her mother's past. Lena stiffened. He lied. Yes, Adrian said quietly. And lies move fast. Margaret stood abruptly. This is why Claire didn't trust the timing. They'll twist this. Adrian's mind raced. Then we don't let them control the narrative. He turned to Lena. Would you be willing to speak? Her eyes widened. Me? Only if you want to, he added quickly. I'll never force you. Lena thought for a long moment. She said my voice mattered, she said. Even if it shook. Adrian nodded, emotion tightening his throat. Then we do it together. Sirens wailed again outside, closer this time, mixing with the sound of helicopters overhead. The world was converging on them now. Adrian straightened his shoulders, feeling the full weight of what he was about to face. He took Lena's hand once more and looked at Margaret. Stay with us. She nodded. Always. As they moved toward the stairs, Adrian knew the next moments would define everything: his legacy, his freedom, and his daughter's future. Above them, cameras waited, lights ready to burn away shadows that had lasted decades. The night cracked open under the glare of cameras and flashing lights, but Adrian Vale did not shield his eyes. For the first time in his life, he stepped forward instead of back. Lena stood beside him, her small hand in his, steadying him in a way no boardroom victory ever had. The reporters surged, voices overlapping, accusations and questions colliding in the air. Adrian raised one hand, not in command, but in quiet request, and something unexpected happened. The noise softened, not because they respected his power, but because they sensed the gravity of the moment. People could feel it when a lie was about to collapse. "My name is Adrian Vale," he began, his voice carrying without strain. "And everything you think you know about how I became who I am is incomplete." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "For years, I told myself that survival justified silence," he continued. "That protecting a company meant protecting people. I was wrong. Silence didn't save lives. It erased them." He paused, then stepped aside slightly so Lena could be seen. "This is my daughter," he said. "Her mother, Claire, was the bravest person I ever knew. She believed the truth had weight, that even when buried, it would rise." Lena felt the cameras turn toward her. Fear fluttered in her chest, but she remembered her mother's voice, calm and warm, telling her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let it decide. She took a breath and spoke. "My mom said waiting is hard," Lena said. "But some things are worth waiting for. She said lies make loud people powerful, but truth gives quiet people a chance." The words landed softly, and somehow hit harder than shouting ever could. Adrian continued. "Tonight, we've released documents, recordings, and testimony related to the factory collapse 15 years ago. These materials show how responsibility was avoided, how families were silenced, and how justice was delayed." A reporter shouted, "Are you confessing to a crime?" Adrian met the question head-on. "I'm confessing to a choice, and accepting the consequences of it." Gasps echoed. Phones vibrated as alerts spread across the world in real time. The story was no longer being controlled. It was alive. From the edge of the crowd, the man from the station watched, his face tight with fury as his narrative unraveled. The lies he had broadcast only hours earlier were already being dissected, contradicted, exposed. The truth, once released, moved faster than fear ever could. Margaret stood just behind Adrian and Lena, tears slipping silently down her face. Claire's promise had been kept. Days turned into weeks. Courtrooms replaced boardrooms. Headlines shifted from scandal to reckoning. Some allies vanished. Others emerged from unexpected places: former workers, families who had waited years to be heard, journalists who refused to look away. Adrian lost wealth. He lost status. He lost the illusion of invincibility he had once worn like armor. What he gained could not be measured. On a quiet morning months later, Adrian and Lena stood at the same train station where everything had begun. The noise was the same: announcements, footsteps, the rush of movement, but it no longer felt overwhelming. Lena held a new sign, smaller and neater than the old cardboard one. It read, "I'm not waiting anymore." Adrian smiled down at her. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I found what I came for." A train arrived, doors opening with a familiar hiss. People stepped on and off, chasing futures, leaving pasts behind. Adrian looked at the tracks, then back at his daughter. For the first time, he didn't feel the pull to escape. He felt rooted. Claire's voice lived on, not in memory alone, but in action, in accountability, in the way one small girl had carried the truth when grown men were too afraid to hold it. As they walked away from the platform together, hand in hand, the station swallowed their footsteps, just another pair among thousands. But the world they left behind was different now, changed not by power or money, but by a choice made when it mattered most. And somewhere, in the quiet space between what was lost and what was found, the truth finally rested, no longer buried, no longer alone.